The writings accompanying this oddity was, aside from a stack of press cuttings, in Professor Angle's most recent hand, and made no pretense of a literary style. What seemed to be the main document was headed Cthulhu Cult, in characters painstakingly printed to avoid the erroneous reading of a word unheard of. This manuscript was divided into two sections, the first of which was headed Dream and Dreamwork of H. A. Wilcock, 7 Thomas Street, Providence, Rhode Island, and the second, Narrative of Inspector John R. LaGrasse, 121 Mainville Street, New Orleans, LA, at 1908 AAS MGT. Notes on same, ampersand, Professor Webb's Associates. The other manuscript papers were all brief notes, some of them accounts of queer dreams of different persons, some of them citations from theosophical books and magazines, notably W. Scott Eliot's Atlantis and The Lost Lemuria, and the rest comments on long-surviving secret societies and hidden cults, with reference passages in such mythological and anthropological source books as Fraser's A Golden Bough and Ms. Murray's Witch Cult in Western Europe. The cuttings largely alluded to or portray mental illness and outbreaks of a group falling on mania in the spring of 1925. The first half of the principal manuscript told a very peculiar tale. It appears that on the 1st of March 1925, a thin, dark young man of neurotic and excited aspect had called upon Professor Angel bearing a singular clay bas-relief, which was then exceedingly damp and fresh. His card bore the name Henry Anthony Wilcock, and my uncle had recognized him as the younger son of an excellent family slightly known to him, who had lately been studying sculpture at the Rhode Island School of Design and living alone at the Fleur-de-Lis building near that institute. Wilcock was a precocious youth of known genius but great eccentricity, and from childhood had excited attention through the strange stories and odd dreams he was in the habit of relaying. He called himself psychically hypersensitive, but the staid folk of the ancient commercial building dismissed him as merely queer. Never mingling much with his kind, he had dropped gradually from social visibility and was now known only to a small group of aesthetists from other towns. Even the Providence Art Club, anxious to preserve its conservatism, had found him quite hopeless. On the occasion of the visit, ran the professor's manuscript, the sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of his host's archaeological knowledge in identifying the hieroglyphics on the bas-relief. He spoke in a dreamy, stilted manner which suggested pose and alienated sympathy, and my uncle showed some sharpness in replying, for the conspicuous freshness of the tablet implied kinship with anything but archaeology. Young Wilcock's rejoinder, which impressed my uncle enough to make him recall and recount it verbatim, was of a fantastical, poetic cast, which must have typified his whole conversation, and which I have since found highly characteristic of him. He said, "It is new indeed, for I made it last night in a dream of strange cities. And dreams are older than brooding Tyre, or the contemplative Sphinx, or the garden girl at Babylon." It was then he began the rambling tale, which suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won the fevered interest of my uncle. There had been a slight earthquake tremor the night before, and the most considerable felt in New England for some years, and Wilcock's imagination had been keenly affected. Upon retiring, he had an unprecedented dream of great cyclopean cities, of Titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister with latent horror. Hieroglyphs had covered the walls and pillars, and from some undermined point below had come a voice that was not a voice, a chaotic sensation which only fancy could transmute into sound, but which he attempted to render by some almost unpronounceable ramble of letters. Cthulhu Futhagan. This verbal jumble was the key to the recollection which excited and disturbed Professor Angal. He questioned the sculptor with scientific minuteness and studied with almost frantic intensity the bas-relief on which the youth had found himself working, chilled, clad only in his light clothes, when waking had stolen bewilderingly over him. My uncle blamed his old age, Wilcock afterwards said, for his slowness in recognizing both hieroglyphs and pictorial design. Many of his questions seemed highly out of place to his visitor, especially those which tried to connect the latter with the strange cults or societies, and Wilcock could not understand the repeated promise of silence which he was offered in exchange for an admission of membership to some widespread, mystical, or paganly religious body. When Professor Angal became convinced that the sculptor was indeed innocent of any cult or system of crypto-law, he besieged his visitor with demands of future reports of dreams. This bore regular fruit, for after the first interview, the manuscript records daily calls of the young man, during which he relayed startling fragments of nocturnal imagery whose burden was always some terrible cyclopean vista of dark and dripping stones, with a subterranean voice or intelligence shouting monotonously in enigmatical sense impacts uninscrutable save as gibberish. The two most frequent repeated are those rendered by the letters Cthulhu and Alaya. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please do not thank me. Thank Ada, Molinai, Valmont, Jolly Joe Star, Dark Griever, and all my wonderful and generous patrons, without whom I would not be able to dedicate the resources and time I do to all my channels. I can never thank them enough. I hope you will join me again, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.